The morning sun beat down mercilessly on Frontier Bend, Wyoming territory, turning the dusty main street into a shimmering ribbon of heat. Clara Jennings stood on the makeshift wooden platform in the center of town, her hands clasped tightly in front of her worn calico dress. The fabric, once a cheerful blue, had faded to the color of a winter sky, and she tugged self-consciously at the waistline that strained against her full figure. Around her, the townspeople gathered like vultures circling carrion. She could hear their whispers cutting through the hot air sharp, cruel words that stung worse than any desert wind. "Lord have mercy! Look at the size of her," muttered Mrs. Abigail Patterson, the banker's wife, fanning herself dramatically. Who in their right mind would bid on that? Clara's cheeks burned, but she kept her chin up, focusing on a point somewhere beyond the crowd. She'd learned long ago that tears only gave them more ammunition. The auctioneer, Mr. Josiah Clemens, cleared his throat nervously. He was a thin man with a mustache that drooped like a dying caterpillar, and he clearly wished he were anywhere but here. "Gentlemen," he began, his reedy voice carrying across the square, "as you know, the Frontier Brides Initiative brings opportunities for matrimony to our fair town." Someone in the crowd snorted, "Fair, that's rich." Clara's fingers dug into her palms. She knew what she looked like, had been reminded of it every day since her parents died of fever 3 winters past. The orphanage in Cheyenne had made it clear girls like her, with curves that defied the fashionable willowy silhouette, had limited options: marriage auction or a life of servitude. At 22, she'd chosen the devil she didn't know. "Miss Clara Jennings," Clemens continued, gesturing weakly in her direction, "is a hard worker, skilled in cooking and household management. Better be, considering how much she must eat," called out Jake Morrison from the back, sending ripples of laughter through the crowd. Clara's jaw tightened. She forced herself to breathe slowly, imagining herself somewhere else, anywhere else, maybe by a cool stream, or in a field of wildflowers where no one could see her or judge the way her hips swelled beneath her skirts. "Shall we start the bidding at $5? Clemens asked, hopefully. Silence. The auctioneer's face reddened. $3. More silence, broken only by the creak of wagon wheels on the adjacent street and the distant whinny of horses. $2! His voice had climbed to an almost comical pitch. "I'll give you 50 cents. Clemens, but only if you throw in a mule to help haul her." Jake Morrison again, clearly enjoying himself. The laughter that followed was like being pelted with stones. Clara felt her composure beginning to crack. This was worse than she'd imagined to be so thoroughly unwanted, so completely rejected. A hot tear escaped before she could stop it, trailing down her cheek like liquid shame. $1, Clemens pleaded, now looking as miserable as Clara felt. "Surely someone." $500. The deep voice cut through the mockery like a knife through butter. Every head turned toward the speaker, and Clara's tear-blurred vision focused on the man striding forward through the suddenly parted crowd. Caleb Hartwell moved like a force of nature, all controlled power and quiet authority. At 6'2", he towered over most of the townspeople, his broad shoulders blocking out the sun as he approached the platform. His face was weathered by 35 years under the western sun, with lines around green eyes that spoke of both laughter and loss. Dark hair, slightly too long for propriety, curled at his collar, and a day's worth of stubble shadowed his strong jaw. Clara had seen him before. Of course. Everyone in Frontier Bend knew Caleb Hartwell, owner of the largest horse ranch in the territory. A man who'd built his fortune through sweat and shrewd business sense. A man who'd buried his first wife 5 years ago and hadn't so much as danced with another woman since. $500, Clemens squeaked, his eyes bulging. "Mr. Hartwell, surely you mean—" "I know what I said." Caleb's voice was steady, almost conversational, but there was steel beneath the calm. He reached the platform and pulled a leather pouch from his coat, counting out bills with deliberate precision. 500, cash. The crowd had gone silent as a grave. Even Jake Morrison seemed to have swallowed his tongue. But Mr. Hartwell, Mrs. Patterson sputtered. You can't possibly, she's what, Mrs. Patterson. Caleb turned those green eyes on the banker's wife, and Clara watched the woman shrink back. A human being standing in the noon sun while folks treat her like livestock. Yes, I can see that. He handed the money to Clemens, who took it with trembling fingers, then turned to Clara. For the first time since the bidding began, someone was looking at her, really looking at her, not through her or around her, but directly into her eyes. Miss Jennings, he said, extending his hand to help her down from the platform. His voice had gentled, become something private between them despite the gawking crowd. Would you do me the honor? Clara stared at his outstretched hand, calloused from years of ranch work, but clean and steady. She had a choice to make: stay on the platform and wait for what, more humiliation, or take the hand of this man who'd just paid a fortune for her, though she couldn't fathom why. She placed her hand in his. His grip was firm but careful, as if he were handling something that might break. As her feet touched the ground, he drew her close, not improperly so, but near enough that she could smell leather and hay and something distinctly him, near enough that when he leaned down, his breath stirred the loose curls at her temple. No beauty should be hidden, he whispered. The words meant only for her. Clara's breath caught. She searched his face for mockery, for the cruel joke that must surely be coming. But his expression was serious, almost tender, and something in those green eyes made her believe just for a moment that he meant it. I don't understand, she whispered back. You will. He straightened, keeping her hand in his as he turned to face the crowd. I believe we're done here. It wasn't a question. The townspeople parted before them like the Red Sea, some still slack-jawed, others whispering furiously behind their hands. Clara kept her eyes forward, acutely aware of Caleb's presence beside her, solid and sure, while her world tilted on its axis. His wagon waited at the edge of the square, a sturdy buckboard hitched to two matched bays. He helped her up with the same careful courtesy he might show a queen, then climbed up beside her, taking the reins with practiced ease. Mr. Hartwell, Clara began as the wagon lurched into motion. I need to know why. Caleb, he corrected, keeping his eyes on the road ahead. And you don't need to know anything right now except that you're safe. You're no longer on that platform, and you'll have a roof over your head and 3 meals a day at the ranch. But $500 is my business. He glanced at her then, and she caught a flash of something pain, maybe, or memory. I've got my reasons. Miss Jennings, maybe someday I'll share them. For now, just know that no one's going to treat you like that again, not while I'm around. Clara wanted to argue, to demand answers, to understand why this man, this wealthy, handsome man who could have any woman in the territory, had just paid a small fortune for her. But exhaustion was settling into her bones, the adrenaline of the auction fading into a deep weariness. It's Clara, she said finally. If you're Caleb, then I'm Clara. He smiled, then just a slight upturn of his lips, but it transformed his face. Clara, it is. They rode in silence for a while, the town falling away behind them as they headed into the vast Wyoming landscape. Clara stole glances at her unexpected savior, trying to reconcile the man beside her with the stories she'd heard. Caleb Hartwell, who'd loved his wife so deeply he'd nearly gone mad with grief when she died. Caleb Hartwell, who'd thrown himself into building his ranch empire to forget. Caleb Hartwell, who just spent $500 on a woman the rest of the town wouldn't bid 2 cents for. You're wondering if I'm touched in the head, he said suddenly, startling her. I know, I wasn't. It's all right. I'd wonder too. He adjusted his grip on the reins. and Clara noticed a thin scar running across the back of his right hand. "Truth is, Clara, I've been watching you, not in an untoward way," he added quickly, seeing her stiffen. "But I've seen how you handle yourself in town, how you help old Mrs. Miller with her packages even when her daughter makes snide remarks about your size. How you gave your last bit of bread to the Jennings kids last week, even though you must have been hungry yourself." Clara's mouth fell open. "You saw that?" "I see a lot of things, and what I saw on that platform today," his jaw tightened. "No one deserves that, especially not someone with your kind of heart." "You don't know me," Clara said softly. "No," he agreed, "but I'd like to, if you'll let me." The simplicity of it, the honesty, made her eyes sting with fresh tears. But these were different from the ones she'd shed on the platform. These were tears of something she'd almost forgotten existed hope. As the Hartwell Ranch came into view, sprawling pastures dotted with horses, a large wooden house that managed to be both impressive and welcoming, Clara made a decision. Whatever Caleb's reasons, whatever came next, she would face it with the same courage that had carried her onto that platform in the first place. She was no longer Clara Jennings, orphan and auction bride. She was Clara Jennings, woman of worth, even if she was only just beginning to believe it herself. The wagon rolled through the ranch gates, and somewhere in the distance, a meadowlark sang its liquid song. Clara straightened her spine and lifted her face to the sun. Whatever tomorrow brought, it had to be better than today. Beside her, Caleb smiled again, and she thought maybe, just maybe, he was right. Beauty shouldn't be hidden. Perhaps it was time she stopped trying to hide hers. The Hartwell Ranch sprawled before Clara like something out of a dream. As the wagon crested the final hill, she gasped at the sight below, endless pastures of golden grass rippling in the wind, sturdy wooden fences creating geometric patterns across the landscape, and horses, dozens of them, grazing peacefully or racing along the fence lines with their manes streaming behind them. The main house stood proud against the backdrop of distant mountains. 2 stories of honey-colored logs with a wide wraparound porch and real glass windows that caught the afternoon light. To the left, a massive barn painted deep red dominated the immediate landscape, with several smaller outbuildings scattered nearby. It was grander than anything Clara had imagined, yet somehow it felt like a home rather than a monument to wealth. "It's beautiful," she breathed, forgetting her nervousness for a moment. "It's work," Caleb replied, but she caught the pride in his voice. "Hard work, every day. But yes, I suppose it is beautiful." As they approached the house, a woman emerged from the front door like a general preparing for battle. She was perhaps 60, with steel gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and a face that had seen too many Wyoming winters. Her dress was practical black cotton, and her hands were planted firmly on her hips. "Caleb Hartwell," she called out before the wagon had even stopped. "You've got some explaining to do. The whole town's buzzing like a disturbed beehive, and Samuel just rode in with a tale that would curl my hair if it wasn't already straight as a poker." "Ruth," Caleb said calmly, setting the brake and climbing down. "I'd like you to meet Miss Clara Jennings. Clara, this is Ruth McCall. She runs the house and, most days, tries to run me too." Ruth's sharp eyes swept over Clara, taking in everything from her faded dress to her tear-stained cheeks. Clara braced herself for another cutting remark, another judgment on her size or worth. Instead, Ruth's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "You look dead on your feet. Child, come on inside. There's cool water and fresh bread, and we'll see about getting you something decent to wear. That dress looks like it's been through a dust storm and back." Clara blinked, surprised by the kindness hidden beneath the brusque manner. Thank you, Mrs. McCall." "Ruth," the older woman corrected. "We don't stand on ceremony here. Caleb, you help her down and then make yourself scarce. The poor girl doesn't need you hovering while she gets settled." Caleb offered Clara his hand again, and she was struck by how natural it felt to place hers in his. Once her feet were on solid ground, he leaned close enough to murmur, "Don't let Ruth scare you. Her bark is worse than her bite, usually." "I heard that," Ruth called without turning around. A smile tugged at Clara's lips, her first genuine smile in days. She followed Ruth into the house, glancing back once to see Caleb watching her with an unreadable expression before he headed toward the barn. The interior of the house was as impressive as the exterior polished wood floors, sturdy furniture that managed to be both practical and elegant, and Native American rugs adding splashes of color. But what drew Clara's attention were the absence of certain things. No feminine touches, no flowers or doilies, or the 100 small things a woman might add to make a house a home. It was a bachelor's residence, well kept but somehow lonely. Ruth led her up a wide staircase to a room at the end of the hall. "This will be yours," she said, opening the door to reveal a space larger than the entire room Clara had shared with 3 other girls at the orphanage. A brass bed dominated one wall, covered with a quilt in shades of blue and green. A washstand with a porcelain basin stood near the window, and a wardrobe waited with its doors slightly ajar, revealing empty hangers. "It's too much," Clara said automatically. "Nonsense." Ruth moved to the window and pulled back the curtains, flooding the room with light. "It's been empty too long. This was meant to be—" She stopped abruptly, pressing her lips together. "Meant to be what?" "Nothing. Ancient history." Ruth's tone brooked no argument. "Now, let's see about getting you cleaned up. There's a hip bath in the storage room. I'll have Samuel bring it up and heat some water. While you're bathing, I'll see what I can do about finding you something to wear. You're broader than what we have on hand, but I'm handy with a needle." Clara felt the familiar flush of shame. Even here, in this unexpected refuge, her body was still wrong, still too much. Ruth must have seen something in her face because she made an impatient sound. "Don't you start that. There's nothing wrong with having a woman's figure. The good Lord made us all different for a reason. Now, you sit down before you fall down, and I'll get things sorted." Left alone, Clara sank onto the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by the day's events. This morning, she'd been preparing to be auctioned off like livestock. Now she sat in a beautiful room in a grand house, purchased by a man who whispered about hidden beauty and looked at her like she mattered. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Miss Clara," a young male voice called. "I've got the bathtub." "Come in," she managed. The door opened to reveal a lanky young man, perhaps 18, with sandy hair and an open, friendly face. He maneuvered a copper hip bath through the door with practiced ease. "I'm Samuel," he said with a shy smile. "Samuel Hutchins. I help out around the ranch. Mr. Hartwell said to tell you welcome, and if you need anything, just holler." "Thank you, Samuel." He set the tub down and straightened, seeming to really look at her for the first time. Clara braced herself, but his expression remained friendly. "Ma'am, if you don't mind me saying, it's real good to have another person around here. Gets mighty quiet sometimes. Just Ruth and Mr. Hartwell and us ranch hands." Before Clara could respond, he was gone, returning moments later with buckets of steaming water. It took several trips, but finally the tub was full, and Ruth had returned with an armload of clothing and a cake of soap that smelled like lavender. "Take your time," Ruth instructed. "Dinner's not for 2 hours yet. I've left some things on the bed they'll need altering, but they'll do for now." Alone again, Clara slowly undressed, each layer of dusty clothing falling away like the day's humiliations. The water was heaven against her skin, washing away the sweat and fear and shame. She stayed in until it cooled, letting the quiet of the house seep into her bones. When she finally emerged and examined the clothes Ruth had left, she found a simple brown skirt and white blouse, both too narrow but wearable if she left some buttons undone and didn't breathe too deeply. There was also a shawl that helped hide the gaps. It wasn't perfect, but it was clean and whole and better than what she'd had. A knock came just as she finished braiding her damp hair. "Clara," Caleb's voice. "May I come in?" Her heart jumped. "Yes." He entered, having changed from his town clothes into work-attire denim trousers and a blue cotton shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing strong forearms. He'd washed too. His hair was damp and curling slightly. "I wanted to check that you're settling in all right." He stayed near the door, maintaining a proper distance. "Ruth, treating you well?" "She's been very kind." "Good." He shifted slightly, seeming uncharacteristically uncertain. "Clara, I know this is all strange and sudden. You must have questions." 100 of them, she admitted. "I'll answer what I can, but first, I need you to understand something. You're not here as a servant or—" He paused, clearly choosing his words carefully. "What I mean is, you're free to leave whenever you wish. I won't stop you, but I hope you'll stay." "Why?" The word came out more desperately than she intended. "Why did you buy me? And please don't say it's because you've seen me help Mrs. Miller with her packages. That's not worth $500. Caleb was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on something beyond the window. When he spoke, his voice was rough. "Did Ruth mention my wife? My first wife? She started to say something about this room. This was meant to be the nursery." The words fell heavy between them. "Margaret Maggie, she was decorating it when she took sick. Lung fever. She was gone within a week." "I'm sorry," Clara whispered. "It was 5 years ago. I've made my peace with it. Mostly." He finally looked at her. "But standing in that square today, watching those people treat you like you were worthless, it reminded me of something Maggie used to say. She was the daughter of a Methodist minister. See, used to quote scripture at me when I got too high on my horse. Remember those who are mistreated, as if you yourselves were suffering." He moved to the window, looking out at his land. "I built all this after she died. Threw myself into work because it was easier than feeling. And it's a good life, but it's an empty one. When I saw you on that platform, bearing their cruelty with such dignity, something in me just knew." "Knew what?" He turned back to her. "That you deserved better. That maybe we both did." Clara's throat felt tight. "So you bought me out of Christian charity?" "No." His green eyes held hers steadily. "I bought you because when I looked at you, I saw strength disguised as softness, beauty that the world's too blind to recognize. And maybe I saw a chance at something I thought I'd never have again." "Which is?" "A reason to come home that's not just habit." The honesty of it took her breath away. She'd expected many things: pity, duty, even some hidden cruelty, but not this raw admission of loneliness that matched her own. "I don't know how to be what you need," she said softly. "I'm not asking you to be anything but yourself. Stay here, work if you want. Ruth could use help with the house or just rest. Let me court you proper, the way I should have if this was a normal situation. And if you decide you can't abide me or this life, I'll give you money to start fresh wherever you choose. And if I decide to stay," something warm flickered in his eyes, "then maybe we both get a second chance at happiness." A bell clanged from downstairs. "That's dinner," Caleb said. "You must be hungry." Clara realized she was ravenous. In fact, she'd been too nervous to eat breakfast, and the day's emotions had hollowed her out. "Starving. Ruth's made pot roast. She only makes it for special occasions, so you should feel honored." He offered his arm. "Shall we?" Clara hesitated only a moment before taking it. His arm was solid beneath her fingers, and he adjusted his stride to match hers as they descended the stairs. The dining room was simple but elegant, with a long oak table that could seat a dozen but was set for 3 at one end. Ruth was already there, ladling gravy over thick slices of beef. About time, she huffed. Food gets cold, and I get cranky. They sat, Caleb at the head and Clara to his right. The food was extraordinary tender beef, creamy mashed potatoes, green beans seasoned with bacon, and fresh bread still warm from the oven. Clara tried to eat delicately, but hunger won out over manners. Good to see a woman who appreciates food, Ruth commented. Too many these days pecking at their plates like birds. They talked of ranch business, a mare ready to foal, fences that needed mending, a contract with the army for cavalry horses. It was comfortable, domestic. And Clara found herself relaxing incrementally. This was so different from the orphanage's silent meals or the grudging charity of the families she'd worked for. Luke Carver came by yesterday, Ruth mentioned casually, but Clara noticed how Caleb's hand tightened on his fork. What did he want? Same as always, to buy you out. Ruth's tone suggested what she thought of that idea. Offered 10% above market value for the whole spread. He can offer 100%. Answer still no. Who's Luke Carver? Clara asked. Caleb's jaw worked. A man who thinks money can buy anything. He owns the ranch to the south, but it's not enough for him. He wants an empire. He also wants what he can't have just because he can't have it. Ruth added meaningfully. Something in the undercurrents of the conversation made Clara uneasy. But before she could pursue it, Samuel burst through the door. Mr. Hartwell, sorry to interrupt, but Dusty's acting up something fierce. Tom thinks it might be colic. Caleb was on his feet instantly. Clara, I'm sorry. Go, she said. Take care of your horse. He squeezed her shoulder briefly the first time he'd touched her since helping her from the wagon, and was gone. Ruth studied Clara across the table. You did well today. I sat on a platform and got bought like a prize heifer. You survived humiliation with your dignity intact and gave a lonely man hope. Ruth's sharp features softened slightly. That takes its own kind of courage. What was she like, Maggie? Ruth considered. Small, delicate, sweet-natured, but with a spine of steel when needed. Nothing like you in looks, but maybe more alike than different where it counts. Would she have approved of this? Maggie would have wanted Caleb happy, and she'd have horsewhipped those folks in town for how they treated you. Ruth stood and began clearing plates. Don't trouble yourself with the ghosts. Child, the living need tending more than the dead. Later, alone in her room. Still a marvel, Clara sat by the window watching the sun set over the ranch. She could see Caleb in the corral with the sick horse, his movements confident and gentle. Other ranch hands moved about their evening chores, and the whole scene was bathed in golden light. She'd woken this morning as nobody, worth less than $1 in the eyes of the world. Tonight, she sat in a fine house with a full belly and a man who saw beauty where others saw only shame. It was too much to process, too strange to fully believe. A movement caught her eye. Caleb was looking up at her window. He raised his hand in a small wave, and she returned it, feeling oddly shy. Then he was back to work, and she was left with a peculiar warmth that came from mattering to someone. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, she was sure of it. There would be adjustments and awkwardness and the weight of the town's judgment. But tonight, she was safe and valued and no longer alone. For now, that was enough. For now, that was everything. The first week at Hartwell Ranch passed in a blur of new routines and tentative adjustments. Clara threw herself into helping Ruth with household duties, finding comfort in the familiar rhythm of cooking, cleaning, and mending. But even within the sanctuary of the ranch, she couldn't escape the weight of what had happened in town. It started with small things. When Samuel returned from Frontier Bend with supplies, he brought more than flour and coffee. He brought whispers. Mrs. Patterson's been flapping her gums to anyone who'll listen, he reported one afternoon, setting down a crate in the kitchen with more force than necessary. Says it ain't proper. What, mister? Heart well done. Ruth snorted. Since when has Abigail Patterson been the arbiter of propriety? The woman once tried to return a bolt of fabric because it was too red for Christian folk. But Clara felt the familiar squeeze of shame in her chest. She'd been at the ranch 5 days, and while Caleb had been nothing but gentlemanly joining them for meals, asking about her day. Showing her around the property, she knew the talk would only grow worse. Her fears were confirmed the following morning when she accompanied Ruth to the general store. Clara had offered to stay behind, but Ruth wouldn't hear of it. You hide away, and they'll think they've won. The older woman declared, Besides, I need another pair of hands, and yours are perfectly good ones. The moment they entered Morrison's general store, conversation ceased. Every eye turned to Clara, and the silence was so complete she could hear the clock ticking on the wall. Mrs. Morrison, a pinched woman who looked like she'd been sucking lemons since birth, barely acknowledged their presence as she tallied their purchases. That'll be $12.40, she said to Ruth, as if Clara were invisible. As they loaded their goods, Clara heard the whispers start behind them. The nerve of her, showing her face. Poor Mr. Hartwell, taken in by a gold digger. My Harold says she must have tricked him somehow. Clara's hands shook as she lifted a sack of flour. Ruth noticed and took it from her. Steady, she murmured. Don't give them the satisfaction. But worse was to come as they prepared to leave. Mrs. Patterson swept in with her daughter, Elizabeth, a pretty blonde who'd reportedly had her eye on Caleb for years. Ruth, Mrs. Patterson said coolly. Then her gaze slid to Clara with naked disgust. And the purchased bride. Afternoon, Abigail, Ruth replied evenly. Elizabeth, all 20 years and willow slim perfection, looked Clara up and down with cruel precision. My, you're even larger up close. How does Caleb bear it? The words hit like physical blows. Clara felt her face burn, her throat close up. She wanted to run, to hide, to disappear entirely. About as well as your father bears your mother's vicious tongue, I imagine. Ruth shot back. Come along, Clara. The air in here has turned sour. They left to the sound of Mrs. Patterson's outraged gasps, but the damage was done. Clara remained silent the entire ride back, tears threatening behind her eyes. That evening, she couldn't bring herself to join Caleb and Ruth for dinner. She pleaded a headache and retreated to her room, where she sat by the window and let the tears finally fall. What had she been thinking? That a new dress and a kind word could change what she was. She was still the fat orphan nobody wanted. Only now she was the fat orphan who'd been bought like cattle. A soft knock interrupted her misery. Clara, Caleb's voice, concerned. Ruth says you're not feeling well. Can I come in? She wiped hastily at her cheeks. I'm fine, just tired. Clara. His tone was gentle but firm. Please. She opened the door to find him holding a tray with a bowl of soup and fresh bread. The simple kindness of it nearly undid her completely. Ruth told me what happened in town, he said, setting the tray on the small table by the window. I'm sorry. It's not your fault. She couldn't meet his eyes. They're right. You know, you could have anyone. Elizabeth Patterson is beautiful and slim and about as interesting as watching paint dry. He pulled up the other chair, sitting close but not touching. Clara, look at me. She did, reluctantly, and found his green eyes blazing with quiet anger. Elizabeth Patterson is the kind of woman who'd count the silver every night to make sure the help didn't steal any. She'd measure out affection like medicine and complain if the roses had too many thorns. Is she conventionally pretty, sure? But there's nothing behind it, nothing real. But you're what kind, yes. Strong, absolutely. Beautiful in a way that makes those shallow folks uncomfortable because they can't reduce you to something simple. He leaned forward. Clara, do you know what I see when I look at you? She shook her head, tears spilling over. I see a woman who gives bread to hungry children even when she's hungry herself. I see someone who works hard without complaint, who brings warmth to a house that's been cold too long. I see curves that speak of life and abundance in a land that's often harsh and spare. His voice dropped. I see someone I want to know better, if she'll let me. But the whole town thinks the town can hang. The vehemence in his voice surprised them both. Sorry, but I mean it. Those people, they're so small. Clara, so afraid of anything different, anything that challenges their narrow ideas of how things should be. You know what they said when I started breeding horses instead of cattle? That I was a fool. Now I supply half the cavalry west of the Missouri. He reached out, hesitated, then gently covered her hand with his. Don't let them make you small. You're worth a dozen Elizabeth Pattersons. That night, unable to sleep, Clara found herself in the kitchen. She'd thought to make tea, but discovered she wasn't alone. Caleb sat at the table, a cup of coffee cooling in front of him and papers spread across the worn wood. Couldn't sleep either, he asked, looking up. Bad dreams. She moved to the stove, then paused. Would you like fresh coffee? I'd like company more. She made tea and joined him, noticing the papers were contracts and ledgers. Ranch business. Always. Luke Carver's been sniffing around my water rights again. He rubbed his forehead. The man's determined to force me out one way or another. Why does he want your ranch so badly? Because I have the best grazing land and water access in 3 counties. Because I won't sell to him. Because he's the kind of man who sees another's success as a personal insult. He gathered the papers into a pile. But mostly because he knows it would destroy what I've built. And he enjoys destroying things. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. The kitchen warm and intimate in the lamplight. Clara found herself studying his hands as he absently turned his coffee cup strong hands. Scarred from work, gentle despite their strength. Tell me about her, she said suddenly. About Maggie. He looked surprised but not upset. What do you want to know? Everything. Nothing. I don't know. She wrapped her hands around her teacup. I see her ghost everywhere, but I don't know if I'm seeing truth or just my imagination. Caleb was quiet for a long moment. She was sunshine. That's the best way I can describe her. She made everything brighter just by being in the room. We met at a church social. She was visiting her aunt in Cheyenne. I was tongue-tied as a schoolboy. But she just laughed and said I'd better learn to talk because she planned on marrying me. She proposed to you. In a way, Maggie didn't believe in waiting for life to happen. She grabbed it with both hands. His smile was distant, lost in memory. We were married 4 months later, had 3 good years before. He stopped, swallowed. The nursery was her project. She was so excited, planning everything down to the smallest detail. You must miss her terribly. I do, but... He looked at her then. Really looked at her. Grief's a funny thing. For the longest time, I thought holding on to it was a way of holding on to her. But lately, I've been thinking maybe she'd be angry with me for using her memory as a wall. A wall? To keep from living, to keep from risking hurt again. His hand moved across the table, not quite touching hers. Then I saw you on that platform, refusing to break despite everything, and I thought, maybe it's time to take down the wall. Clara felt her heart racing. I'm not her. Caleb, I couldn't be Sunshine if I tried. I don't want you to be her. His voice was fierce, urgent. I want you to be you, exactly as you are. She wanted to believe him, but the voices from town echoed in her head, mixing with years of similar cruel words. I should go back to bed, she said, standing abruptly. He didn't try to stop her, but as she reached the door, he spoke. Clara, that first night, I told you no beauty should be hidden. I meant it. Don't let them convince you otherwise. The next few days were a careful dance of approach and retreat. Caleb seemed to sense her need for space, but he made his interest clear in small ways: a wildflower left on her breakfast plate, an invitation to watch him work with a new colt, his genuine pleasure when she laughed at something Samuel said. Ruth, meanwhile, had declared war on Clara's wardrobe. "No woman in my house is going to make do with ill-fitting cast-offs," she announced, producing a measuring tape and a determined expression. As Ruth worked, pinning and adjusting, she talked about the ranch's early days, about Caleb's struggle to build something lasting, about her own husband, dead these 15 years. "He was a good man, my Robert," she said around a mouthful of pins. "Not handsome, not rich, but good clean through. That's rarer than gold out here." "Like Caleb," Clara said without thinking, then blushed. Ruth's eyes sharpened. "Yes, like Caleb. That boy's got more honor in his little finger than most men have in their whole bodies. But he's also human, with a human's need for warmth and companionship." She stepped back, surveying her work. "The question is, are you brave enough to give it?" That afternoon, as Clara helped prepare supper, Samuel burst in again. It seemed to be his way. "Miss Clara, Mr. Hartwell asks if you'd like to see the new foal. She's a beauty." Clara glanced at Ruth, who made a shooing motion. "Go on, I can manage." She found Caleb in the smaller barn, kneeling beside a chestnut mare and her hours-old baby. The foal was all legs and curiosity, wobbling but determined. "She's perfect," Clara breathed. "Enchanted." "Want to name her?" Caleb asked. "It's tradition whoever sees her first after me gets naming rights." "Really?" At his nod, Clara studied the baby, who was attempting to investigate her skirts. "Hope. Her name is Hope." "Hope it is." He stood, dusting off his knees. "Good name. We could all use a little more of that." They stood together watching the mare and foal, and Clara felt something shift inside her chest. Maybe it was the peaceful barn, or the miracle of new life, or just Caleb's solid presence beside her. But for the first time since the auction, the cruel voices in her head quieted. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" "For seeing me when no one else did." He turned to her then, and the look in his eyes made her breath catch. "Clara." But whatever he might have said was interrupted by the sound of horses approaching fast. They stepped out of the barn to see 3 riders coming hard, dust billowing behind them. Caleb's expression darkened. "Carver." Luke Carver swung down from his black stallion with the easy grace of a man used to being watched. He was handsome in a sharp, calculating way, with pale eyes that missed nothing and a smile that never quite reached them. "Hartwell," he said pleasantly, as if he hadn't just ridden onto private property uninvited. "Heard you made quite a purchase in town." "What I do is none of your concern." "Carver." "Oh, but it is." Those cold eyes found Clara, traveled over her with insulting thoroughness. "When my neighbor starts acting strangely, spending outrageous sums on curiosities, it affects property values." Clara felt herself shrink under that gaze, all her confidence evaporating. "Get off my land," Caleb said quietly, but there was steel in his voice. "Just being neighborly," Carver said, still staring at Clara. "Wanted to see what $500 buys these days? Have to say, Hartwell, I'm disappointed, though I suppose every man has his tastes." The insult hung in the air like a physical thing. Clara wanted to die, to disappear, to be anywhere but here. But before she could move, Caleb had stepped in front of her, blocking Carver's view. "You've got 10 seconds to get back on that horse, or what you'll defend your purchase's honor," Carver laughed. "How noble. Tell me, does she moo when you—" He never finished. Caleb's fist connected with his jaw, sending him sprawling in the dust. The 2 men with him reached for their guns, but stopped at a sharp whistle from the barn. Samuel and 2 other ranch hands emerged, rifles casual but ready. Carver got to his feet slowly, wiping blood from his mouth. "You'll regret that, Hartwell. Get out." They left, Carver's pale eyes promising retribution. Clara stood frozen, shocked by the violence, by Caleb defending her, by everything. "I'm sorry," Caleb said, flexing his hand. His knuckles were already swelling. "You shouldn't have had to hear that." "You hit him. For me. I'd do it again." He turned to her, his eyes fierce. "No one speaks about you that way. Not Carver, not the town gossips. No one." "But he's right. You did buy me. I am just a—" "Stop." He gripped her shoulders gently. "You are not a purchase. You are not property. You are Clara Jennings. And you are under my protection because I choose it, because you deserve dignity and respect and a chance at happiness. Do you understand?" She nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. "Good. Now, let's get some ice on these knuckles before Ruth sees and lectures me about violence solving nothing." But as they walked back to the house, Clara noticed how he kept himself between her and the direction Carver had gone, protective even now. And something warm unfurled in her chest, not quite trust, not quite love, but the beginning of both. Hope, she thought, like the foal. Maybe that's what Caleb was offering, not just shelter or protection, but hope for something better. Maybe, just maybe, she was brave enough to reach for it. The drought began subtly, with morning dews that disappeared too quickly and afternoon winds that carried more dust than usual. Clara noticed it first in the kitchen garden, where the tomato leaves curled inward despite her faithful watering. Within 2 weeks, what had been an oddity became a crisis. "Haven't seen it this dry since 68 inches, Ruth muttered. Staring at the cloudless sky from the porch, the horizon shimmered with heat mirages, and the usually verdant pastures had taken on a brittle, yellow cast. Lost half the county's livestock that year. Clara watched Caleb stride across the yard, his face grim beneath the shadow of his hat. He'd been up before dawn every day, organizing the hands to move the horses to pastures closer to the remaining water sources. The easy confidence she'd grown accustomed to had been replaced by a tension that showed in the set of his shoulders, the tightness around his eyes. "The creek's down to a trickle," Samuel reported at the breakfast table, his usual cheerfulness dampened. "And the well water's dropping fast." Caleb pushed his barely touched plate aside. "We'll have to start hauling water from the river. It's 12 miles, but we don't have a choice. That's a full day's work just for water." Tom Bradley, the senior ranch hand, pointed out. "How are we supposed to tend the horses and fix fences and—" "We do what we must," Caleb interrupted, but his voice was weary. "Everyone pulls double duty until this breaks." Clara stood. "I'll help." Every head turned to her. She'd been at the ranch 3 weeks now, and while she'd proven herself in the house, outdoor work was another matter entirely. "Clara, that's not necessary." Caleb began. "You said everyone pulls double duty." She lifted her chin, meeting his concerned gaze. "I'm not a decoration. I can work." Ruth snorted. "Girl's got a point, and Lord knows we need every able body." That's how Clara found herself bouncing on the hard seat of a water wagon the next morning, the reins awkward in her hands despite Samuel's patient instruction. The sun was barely up, but already the heat pressed down like a physical weight. "You're doing fine, Miss Clara," Samuel encouraged as she negotiated the rutted track. "Just keep 'em steady." By the time they reached the river, Clara's dress was soaked with sweat, and her hands were beginning to blister despite the borrowed work gloves. But she didn't complain, not when she saw the worry etched on every face, not when the survival of everything Caleb had built hung in the balance. Loading the water barrels was back-breaking work. Clara might have been soft compared to the ranch hands, but she was strong from years of manual labor. She wrestled the heavy containers with determination, ignoring the protests of muscles unused to this particular strain. "Let me get that." Caleb appeared at her elbow as she struggled with a particularly unwieldy barrel. "I can manage," she insisted, then gasped as her grip slipped. He caught the barrel easily, his arms brushing hers as he steadied it. For a moment, they stood frozen, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his green eyes, smell the mixture of leather and sweat and something uniquely him. "Together," he said quietly, and she wasn't sure if he meant just the barrel. They lifted in unison, their movements falling into a rhythm as natural as breathing. Load, lift, carry, return. Again and again, until Clara's world narrowed to the work and the man beside her. It was during the third water run that disaster nearly struck. The horses, stressed by the heat and the heavy loads, spooked at a rattlesnake coiled beside the trail. Clara's team lurched sideways, the wagon tilting dangerously on the slope. "Jump!" Samuel shouted, but Clara's hands were tangled in the reins. The wagon teetered, about to overturn, when Caleb appeared from nowhere. He vaulted onto the moving wagon, grabbed the reins from Clara's frozen hands, and hauled back with all his strength. Muscles corded in his arms as he fought to control the panicked horses, his voice steady and commanding as he talked them down. The wagon settled back onto all four wheels with a bone-jarring thud. Caleb turned to Clara, his face white beneath its tan. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, unable to speak. He pulled her against him then, propriety be damned, one hand cradling her head against his chest. She could feel his heart racing as fast as hers. "Don't ever scare me like that again," he murmured into her hair. "I won't," she whispered, allowing herself just a moment to lean into his strength before pulling away. The other hands were watching, and she could feel her cheeks burning with more than the heat. That night, as Clara soaked her blistered hands in cool water, Ruth appeared with a jar of salve. "Let me see," the older woman commanded, then tutted at the raw skin. "You did good today," Caleb noticed. "Everyone worked hard. Not everyone nearly got themselves killed and made our stoic mister. Hartwell looked like he'd seen a ghost." Ruth's hands were gentle as she applied the salve. "That man's got it bad for you, girl." Clara's heart skipped, but she kept her voice steady. "He's just being kind." "Kind?" Ruth laughed. "But it wasn't unkind. Honey, I've known Caleb Hartwell since he was 22 years old, full of dreams and vinegar. I've seen him kind, and I've seen him polite, and I've seen him friendly. What I saw today, that was a man in love." The drought worsened. Each day dawned hotter and drier than the last, the sky a merciless bowl of brass. The horses grew listless, their coats dull. The hands worked in shifts to avoid the worst of the heat, but exhaustion showed on every face. It was Clara who suggested the moonlight runs. "If we haul water at night, we avoid the heat," she said at dinner. "The horses will be fresher, and we can work longer." Caleb studied her across the table. In the lamplight, she could see new lines around his eyes, the weight of responsibility pressing down. "It's dangerous. No moon tonight, and the trail's treacherous in the dark." "More dangerous than losing the horses to thirst," she countered. He was quiet for a long moment, then nodded. "We'll try it." That night, Clara found herself back on the wagon seat, but this time with Caleb beside her. Lanterns hung from poles on either side, casting dancing shadows that made the familiar trail alien. The temperature had dropped 20 degrees, and the horses moved with renewed energy. "You were right," he said as they rumbled along. "About the night runs." "Even a blind squirrel finds a nut sometimes," she replied, using one of Ruth's favorite sayings. He chuckled, the first genuinely relaxed sound she'd heard from him in days. "You're no blind squirrel. Clara, you see things others miss." They worked in companionable silence at the river, the night sounds of crickets and owls replacing the harsh buzz of daytime insects. Loading the barrels by lantern light was challenging, but the cool air made the labor almost pleasant. It was on the return journey that the moment Clara would remember forever occurred. They'd stopped to rest the horses at the journey's midpoint, a small grove of cottonwoods that offered shelter. Caleb checked the animals while Clara stretched her aching back, looking up at the canopy of stars. "Beautiful," she murmured. "Yes," he agreed, but when she glanced over, he wasn't looking at the sky. The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with possibility. He moved closer, his hand coming up to cup her cheek, thumb brushing over her cheekbone with infinite gentleness. "Clara," he said, her name a question and a prayer. She leaned into his touch, her eyes fluttering closed. I've never—" "Neither have I," he said, and she understood he meant not since Maggie. Not like this. "We don't have to." "I want to," she whispered, opening her eyes to meet his. "I'm just afraid." "Of what?" "That I'll disappoint you. That you'll realize everyone was right about me. That I'm too much and not enough all at once." His other hand came up to frame her face, holding her like something precious. "Clara Jennings, you could never disappoint me. You're brave and kind and strong. You work harder than men twice your size. You bring joy to a house that forgot what laughter sounded like." His voice roughened. "And when I look at you, I don't see too much or not enough. I see everything I never knew I was looking for." He kissed her then, soft and sweet beneath the stars. It was a first kiss in all the ways that mattered, tentative, discovering, full of promise. Clara's hands came up to grip his shoulders, anchoring herself as the world tilted and reformed around this new truth she was wanted. She was chosen. She was enough. When they pulled apart, both breathing unsteadily, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. "Was that all right?" he asked. And she loved him a little for the uncertainty in his voice. "More than all right," she managed. They finished the water run in a different kind of silence, aware of each other in a new way. Their hands brushed as they worked. Their eyes met and held. Something had shifted, fundamental and irreversible. The next days blurred together in a haze of heat and labor. The night runs continued. And if Caleb found more reasons to work alongside Clara, if their rest stops featured more conversation and stolen kisses, no one commented. The ranch hands, exhausted from double shifts, were just grateful for the water that kept coming. It was Samuel who first spotted the clouds building on the western horizon. "Mr. Hartwell," he shouted, pointing. They all stopped work to stare. After weeks of empty sky, the dark towers of Thunderheads seemed unreal, a mirage born of desperate hope. "Don't get excited yet," Tom warned. "Seen plenty of storms build up and blow over without dropping a thing." But as the day wore on, the clouds continued to build, darkening from gray to purple to black. The wind picked up, carrying the unmistakable scent of rain. Clara was helping Ruth secure the kitchen shutters when the first fat drops fell. They stood frozen for a moment. Then Ruth let out a whoop that would have done a cowhand proud. "Rain!" she shouted. "Blessed, beautiful rain!" Within minutes, the drops became a deluge. Clara ran outside, not caring that she was soaked in seconds. All around the ranch, people emerged from buildings, faces turned skyward, laughing and crying at once. She found Caleb by the main corral, hat off, letting the rain stream down his face. When he saw her, his face split into a grin that made him look years younger. "We made it," he said, having to raise his voice over the drumming rain. "We did," she agreed, then shrieked with laughter as he caught her around the waist and spun her in a circle. He set her down, but didn't let go. And there, in the middle of the storm, with the ranch hands cheering and the horses prancing with relief, he kissed her again. This time there was nothing tentative about it. This was a kiss of survival and celebration, of partnership tested and proven. "I love you," he said against her lips, the words almost lost in the rain. Clara's heart soared. "I love you too." They stood there, holding each other as the drought broke around them, washing away weeks of dust and fear. The land would recover, the horses would thrive, and Clara had found something she'd never thought possible, a place where she belonged, a purpose that mattered, and a man who saw her truly. Later, sitting on the porch watching the rain fall, wrapped in blankets with cups of Ruth's coffee warming their hands, Clara leaned against Caleb's shoulder. "What happens now?" she asked. He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Now we rebuild. We let the land heal. We get back to normal life." He paused. "And maybe we plan a wedding, if you'll have me." Clara turned to stare at him. "Are you proposing?" "I'm trying to, though I probably should have gotten a ring first," and asked properly, "On one knee." Maggie always said I was terrible at romantic gestures. "I don't need gestures," Clara said softly. "I just need you." "Is that a yes?" "Yes, absolutely yes." Ruth's voice carried from inside. "About time, Samuel. You owe me $5. They laughed, and the sound mingled with the rain, washing the world clean and new. The week following the drought's end brought a different kind of storm to Hartwell Ranch. News of Caleb's proposal had somehow reached town. Samuel swore innocence, but his guilty expression when questioned suggested otherwise, and the gossip mill churned with renewed vigor. Clara tried to focus on the joy of her engagement, on the warm looks Caleb gave her across the dinner table, on Ruth's enthusiastic wedding planning, but the weight of others' judgment pressed down like the heat had just days before. It came to a head on a golden afternoon when Clara was alone in the barn, tending to Hope and her mother. She'd grown fond of the little foal, who now pranced about with increasing confidence. She was so absorbed in watching the baby horse that she didn't hear the approaching footsteps until a shadow fell across the stall door. Elizabeth Patterson stood there, resplendent in a green riding habit that probably cost more than Clara had seen in her lifetime. Behind her lurked two of her friends, Mary Sinclair and Dorothy Hughes, both daughters of prosperous ranchers. "So it's true," Elizabeth said, her pretty face twisted with disgust. "He's actually going to marry you." Clara straightened, hay still in her hands. "Miss Patterson, can I help you with something?" "You can help by leaving." Elizabeth stepped into the barn, her friends flanking her like soldiers. "Pack your things and go back to whatever gutter you crawled from." "This is private property," Clara said, proud that her voice remained steady. "You need to leave." "Private property," Elizabeth laughed, the sound sharp as breaking glass. "How appropriate, since you're nothing but property yourself. Bought and paid for like a brood mare." The word stung, but Clara had heard worse. What she hadn't expected was for Elizabeth to move closer, her voice dropping to a vicious whisper. "Do you really think he wants you? You're nothing but a charity case, a way for him to prove he's over his precious Maggie. But men like Caleb don't stay with women like you." Her gaze raked over Clara's form with deliberate cruelty. "He'll use you to warm his bed and get him sons, then find someone worthy to actually be seen with in public." "That's not true," Clara said, but doubt crept in like poison. "Isn't it? Has he taken you to town as his fiancé, introduced you to the other ranchers, or does he keep you hidden out here like a shameful secret?" Elizabeth smiled at Clara's flinch. "I thought so." Mary giggled nervously. "Elizabeth, perhaps we should—" "I'm not finished." Elizabeth's eyes glittered with malice. "I want to make something very clear. Caleb Hartwell was meant for better things, better women. If you had any decency, any real care for him, you'd leave before you drag him down to your level." "And what level would that be?" The quiet male voice made all four women jump. Caleb stood in the barn entrance, and Clara had never seen him truly angry until this moment. His face was carved from stone, but his eyes burned with cold fire. "Caleb?" Elizabeth's demeanor changed instantly, becoming soft and fluttering. "We were just— I heard what you were doing." He moved into the barn with the controlled grace of a predator. What I want to know is what gives you the right to come onto my land and speak to my fiancé that way." "Your fiancé?" Dorothy squeaked. "But surely you can't mean to actually what marry the woman I love." He reached Clara's side, his hand finding hers with sure purpose. "The woman who worked beside me through the drought, who risked her life to help save this ranch, the woman who brings light to every room she enters." Elizabeth's face flushed ugly red. "She's beneath you. Everyone knows it. You're making a fool of yourself over someone who should be grateful just to scrub your floors." "Get out!" Caleb's voice was deadly quiet. "Get off my land and don't come back. Any of you. And Elizabeth, if I hear you've spoken one more word against Clara, I'll make sure your father knows exactly why the Hartwell Ranch will no longer be buying supplies from his store." It was a serious threat. The Hartwell Ranch was one of the biggest customers in the county. Elizabeth paled, but rallied for one last shot. "You'll regret this," she hissed, "when you wake up one day and realize what you've settled for." "The only thing I regret," Caleb interrupted, "is that I stood by and let people like you make Clara doubt her worth. That ends now." The three women left in a flurry of silk and indignation. Clara stood frozen, her hand still clasped in Caleb's, trembling with reaction. "How much did you hear?" she asked in a small voice. "Enough." He turned to face her, his free hand coming up to cup her cheek. "Clara, look at me." She did, tears threatening. "She was wrong about everything." "You're not hidden away. You're not property. You're not someone I'm settling for." His thumb brushed away an escaped tear. "But she might have been right about one thing. I haven't done enough to show the world how proud I am to have you by my side." "Caleb!" "No, let me finish." He pulled her closer, holding her gaze. "I've let my desire to protect you from their cruelty keep us isolated, but hiding only gives them power, so here's what we're going to do." He outlined his plan with military precision. They would attend the upcoming harvest dance in town, the social event of the season. They would visit the neighboring ranches. They would take their place in the community as a couple, and anyone who had a problem with it could deal with him directly. But what if Clara began? "What if they're cruel? Some will be. What if they whisper, 'Let them'? Clara, I spent 5 years hiding from life, from feeling, from risk. You changed that. You made me want to live again, not just exist." He pressed his forehead to hers. "I won't hide anymore. Not from them. Not from this. I love you, and I want the whole world to know it." That's when he pulled her into his arms properly. There in the barn, with dust motes dancing in the afternoon light and Hope watching curiously from her stall. His kiss was different this time, possessive, claiming, a promise and a declaration all at once. Clara melted against him, her soft curves fitting against his hard planes like two pieces of a puzzle finally coming together. His hands tangled in her hair, pins scattering as the careful bun came undone. She made a small sound of surprise that turned into something else as he deepened the kiss, backing her gently against the stable wall. Years of propriety and restraint fell away as they lost themselves in each other, in the heat building between them like summer lightning. "Clara," he breathed against her lips, her name a reverent whisper. His hands traced the generous curves that others mocked but he worshipped, seeing abundance where others saw excess, beauty where others saw shame. My Clara, my beautiful, brave Clara. She was crying now, but they were tears of joy, of release, of finally believing what he'd been telling her all along. She was wanted. She was desired. She was loved exactly as she was. "No beauty should be hidden," he murmured, echoing his first words to her. And she finally understood what he'd meant that day on the platform. Not just physical beauty, though he made her feel beautiful with every look, every touch, but the beauty of her spirit, her strength, her heart, all the things she'd learned to hide behind downcast eyes and hunched shoulders. A discreet cough from the barn entrance broke them apart. Ruth stood there, trying and failing to hide a smile. "Sorry to interrupt, but we've got company. Luke Carver just rode up with a dozen men." Caleb's expression darkened. He quickly helped Clara repin her hair, his fingers gentle despite the tension suddenly radiating from him. "Stay here," he ordered. But Clara shook her head. "We just agreed no more hiding. Whatever this is, we face it together." Pride flashed in his eyes. "Together, then." They emerged from the barn to find Carver and his men arranged in a semicircle near the main house. Samuel and the other ranch hands had appeared, rifles prominently displayed. The air crackled with tension. "Carver," Caleb said coolly, "this is becoming a bad habit." "Just came to make you another offer," Carver said, but his eyes were on Clara, traveling over her with the same insulting appraisal as before. "Though I see you're still making interesting choices." "State your business and get out." "Fine." Carver dismounted with showy ease. "I'll give you $50,000 for the whole spread. Cash. That's $20,000 above market value." "Not interested." "You haven't heard the rest." Carver's smile was sharp as a blade. "See, I've been doing some research. Turns out there's some question about your water rights. Paperwork that might not be entirely legal." Caleb went very still. "My water rights are ironclad." "Are they? Because I've got a judge in Cheyenne who might see things differently." "Of course. If you were to sell to me, all those questions would just disappear." "That's blackmail," Clara burst out. Carver's attention swung to her. "That's business, sweetheart. Though I wouldn't expect someone like you to understand the complexities." "Someone like me?" Clara stepped forward, anger overcoming fear. "You mean someone who works for what they have instead of trying to steal it? Someone who knows the value of honest labor? Or do you just mean someone who refuses to be made small by small men like you?" Carver's face darkened. "You'd better watch your tongue, woman." "Or what?" Clara felt Caleb tense beside her, but she wasn't finished. "You'll spread more lies, try to destroy what you can't have. You're nothing but a bully, Mr. Carver, and bullies are always cowards at heart." "Clara," Caleb warned softly, but she could hear the pride beneath the caution. Carver took a step toward her, and suddenly every rifle was raised, hammers cocking in a symphony of threat. "Touch her and die," Caleb said conversationally. Carver stopped, his hands clenching. "This isn't over. Hartwell, that judge in Cheyenne is expecting to hear from me. You've got a week to reconsider my offer before things get complicated." "Get off my land." They watched the dust settle from the departing riders. Clara felt the adrenaline drain away, leaving her shaky. "That was either very brave or very foolish," Caleb said. "Both. Definitely both." He pulled her against his side. "But magnificent. Did you see his face when you called him a coward?" "Is it true about the water rights?" His jaw tightened. "The paperwork is solid, filed properly 20 years ago, but with enough money and a corrupt judge." "We'll fight it," Clara said firmly. "Together." "Together," he agreed. "But first, we need to go to Cheyenne. I have a lawyer there, and some connections of my own. If Carver wants a fight, he'll get one." That evening, as Clara helped Ruth prepare supper, the older woman was unusually quiet, finally. As Clara set the table, Ruth spoke. "You did good today, standing up to that snake Carver, not letting those harpy daughters of Satan drive you off." "I was terrified," Clara admitted. "Course you were. Courage isn't about not being scared. It's about doing what's right despite the fear." Ruth paused in her bread slicing. "Maggie would have liked you." Clara's hands stilled. It was the first time Ruth had offered such a direct comparison. She had backbone too, though hers was quieter. Used to say Caleb needed someone who could match his strength, not just complement it. Ruth's eyes were distant with memory. "I think she knew." Somehow, that last week, she made me promise to take care of him, to not let him shut himself away. He'll need someone brave, she said. Someone who won't let him hide. Ruth. I'm not saying she foresaw you specifically, but she knew the kind of woman Caleb would need when he was ready to live again. Ruth resumed her slicing with brisk efficiency. And here you are. The next morning, they prepared for the journey to Cheyenne. It would take 2 days by wagon, and Caleb was bringing Tom and 2 other hands as protection. Clara packed carefully, including the new dress Ruth had finished a deep blue that brought out her eyes and fit her properly. We'll stop at the Hendersons' ranch tonight, Caleb explained as they loaded the wagon. They're good people, fair-minded. It'll be a good test of how folks receive us. And if they don't receive us well, then we'll sleep in the barn and press on to Cheyenne. He helped her up to the wagon seat. But Jim Henderson owes me 3 favors from the time I helped him through a bad winter. He'll be decent. As they rolled away from the ranch, Clara looked back at the place that had become home in such a short time. Whatever happened in Cheyenne, whatever schemes Carver hatched, she knew they'd face it together. She was no longer the frightened girl on the auction platform. She was Clara Jennings, soon to be Clara Hartwell, and she had found her courage. Stop fretting, Caleb said, reading her mood with uncanny accuracy. We've weathered drought and gossip and Elizabeth Patterson's viper tongue. We can handle whatever comes. Together, Clara said, making it a vow. Together, he confirmed, and flicked the reins to urge the horses faster toward whatever fate awaited them in Cheyenne. Behind them, the ranch disappeared into the distance, but Clara didn't look back again. She was too busy looking forward, her hand in Caleb's, ready for whatever came next. The night was too quiet. Clara woke with a start, her heart pounding before she even understood why. Beside her, Caleb was already sitting up in the bed they'd shared for 3 weeks now, as husband and wife. The ceremony in Cheyenne had been small, but legal, witnessed by his lawyer and a judge who owed Caleb's family old favors. "What is it?" she whispered. "Listen." Then she heard it, or rather, didn't hear it. The horses, usually restless with small sounds throughout the night, were completely silent. Too silent. Caleb was out of bed and pulling on his clothes before she could speak again. "Stay here," he ordered, grabbing his rifle from beside the door. "Caleb." "I mean it. Clara, something's wrong." He slipped out into the darkness, and Clara sat frozen for perhaps 10 seconds before her newfound courage asserted itself. She wasn't the type to cower while others faced danger. She pulled on her wrapper and boots, grabbed the shotgun Caleb had taught her to use, and crept to the window. At first, she saw nothing in the moonless night. Then, a flicker of orange in the direction of the main barn. "Fire!" The scream tore from her throat. "Fire in the barn!" The ranch exploded into activity. Men poured from the bunkhouse. Ruth appeared on the porch with her gray hair and papers, and somewhere a bell began clanging. But Clara's attention was fixed on the barn where Caleb had disappeared, where flames were now licking up the walls with terrifying speed. She ran, her nightgown billowing behind her, the shotgun forgotten on the porch. The heat hit her like a physical wall as she neared the structure, and she could hear the horses now screaming in terror. "Caleb!" She tried to enter, but Tom Bradley caught her arm. "No, ma'am, it's too dangerous. He's in there." "We'll get him." But Clara wrenched free with strength born of desperation. The smoke was thick, acrid, burning her eyes and throat. She dropped to her knees where the air was clearer, crawling forward. "Caleb, where are you?" She heard coughing to her left and scrambled toward it. He was at the far stalls, fighting to free the horses. Several were already loose, milling in panic, and he was wrestling with the gate where Hope and her mother were trapped. "Clara, get out!" he shouted when he saw her. "Not without you." She reached his side, adding her weight to his as they pulled at the warped gate. The heat was incredible, and overhead, she could hear the ominous crack of weakening beams. Together they wrenched the gate free. The mare bolted, Hope close behind her, and Caleb grabbed Clara's hand. "Run!" They stumbled toward the entrance, Clara's lungs burning, eyes streaming. A beam crashed down behind them, sending up a shower of sparks. She could see the doorway ahead, filled with the silhouettes of ranch hands ready to pull them to safety. The second beam caught Caleb across the shoulders, driving him to his knees. "No!" Clara turned back, heedless of Tom's shouts, heedless of the inferno around them. She grabbed Caleb under the arms, using every ounce of strength in her sturdy frame. Get up, you have to get up." He was heavy, semi-conscious, but Clara was a woman who had hauled water barrels and hay bales. More importantly, she was a woman who refused to lose the man she loved. She dragged him, inch by agonizing inch, as the barn collapsed around them. Hands reached for them, Tom, Samuel, others pulling them the last few feet to safety. They collapsed on the ground, coughing, retching, but alive. "Caleb!" Clara's hands ran over him, checking for injuries. His shirt was singed, a nasty burn across his back where the beam had struck, but he was breathing. "I'm all right," he gasped, then focused on her with sudden alarm. "You're hurt!" She looked down, surprised to see her nightgown was charred in places, her hands blistered from the hot metal gate. She hadn't even noticed. "Ruth?" Caleb called. "Ruth, help her!" "Help yourself first, you fool man," Ruth said, appearing with her medical supplies. "Samuel, get more water. Tom, organize a bucket brigade in case the fire spreads. And someone figure out how this started." As Ruth tended their burns, the ranch hands fought to contain the fire. The barn was a total loss, but they managed to keep it from spreading to the other buildings. Dawn was breaking by the time the last flames were extinguished, revealing the smoking ruin of what had been a beautiful structure. Mr. Hartwell. One of the younger hands, Billy Morrison, came running from behind the destroyed barn. "You need to see this!" They followed him, Caleb leaning on Clara despite his protests that he was fine. Behind the barn, clear in the dawn light, were hoofprints in the stub of a still-warm torch. "Arson," Tom said grimly. Caleb's face was stone. "Carver." "We can't prove it," Clara said, though she believed it too. "Don't need to prove it. I know." He turned to Tom. "Double the night watch. If they come back—" "Caleb!" a new voice called. Jim Henderson rode up, his horse lathered with sweat. "Saw the smoke from my place. What happened?" "Someone fired my barn." Jim's weathered face darkened. "Not someone. Carver's been bragging in town about how you'd regret crossing him. Half the saloon heard him last night. Will they testify to that?" Jim's silence was answer enough. People might disapprove of Carver, but few would openly oppose him. "There's more," Jim continued reluctantly. "That judge in Cheyenne, the one Carver mentioned, he's agreed to review your water rights. Hearing set for next week." Clara felt Caleb tense beside her. Without those water rights, the ranch would die as surely as if every building burned. "We'll fight," she said firmly. "With what?" Caleb's voice was bitter. "A burned barn, exhausted horses, and a corrupt judge." "With the truth. With our friends." She looked at Jim. "With people who know what's right." Jim shifted uncomfortably. "Clara, I'd like to help, but Carver holds my loans. If I oppose him openly—" "You'd lose everything," Caleb finished. "I understand." "I'm sorry." After Jim left, they stood among the ashes of their barn. Clara could see the defeat in Caleb's shoulders, the way the fight seemed to drain out of him. "Hey," she said softly, turning him to face her. "Remember what you told me? We don't give them the power. We don't let them make us small." "That was before nothing?" So we lost a barn. We'll build another. So Carver has a judge. We'll find a better one. You didn't buy me off that platform just to give up at the first real challenge." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "You saved my life in there. You saved mine first. We're even." She cupped his soot-streaked face. "I won't let Luke Carver take what we've built. I won't let him win. Clara." "No, you stood up for me when the whole town said I was worthless. Now it's my turn." She pulled him down for a fierce kiss, tasting smoke and determination. "We're going to fight, and we're going to win." The next days were a whirlwind of activity. While Caleb and the hands worked to salvage what they could and care for the traumatized horses, Clara implemented her own plan. She might not have money or influence, but she had something else: the ability to see people clearly and appeal to their better natures. She started with the women, visiting the ranches with Ruth, bringing pies and preserves, sitting in kitchens and parlors. She didn't speak against Carver directly; that would have put backs up. Instead, she talked about the fire, about the horses they'd saved, about how grateful she was for the community's support in rebuilding. "Such a shame, Mrs." Henderson murmured over tea. "That beautiful barn." "Yes," Clara agreed. "Though we're blessed no one was killed. When I saw Caleb trapped under that beam," she let her voice break just a little, saw the sympathy bloom in the other woman's eyes. Word spread, as she'd known it would. The image of Clara dragging her injured husband from a burning building was powerful, especially contrasted with Carver's suspected involvement. Meanwhile, she had Samuel and the younger hands spread different stories in town tales of Carver's threats, his attempts to steal water rights, his pattern of forcing out smaller ranchers. Seeds of doubt about Carver's character, carefully planted. 3 nights before the hearing, unexpected help arrived. A buggy pulled up after dinner, and Clara was shocked to see Mrs. Patterson climb down, followed by several other town matrons. Mrs. Hartwell," Abigail Patterson said stiffly. "May we speak with you?" Clara glanced at Caleb, who looked as surprised as she felt. "Of course. Please, come in." In the parlor, Mrs. Patterson sat ramrod straight, clearly uncomfortable. "I owe you an apology," she said abruptly. "My behavior at the auction was unchristian." Clara blinked. Thank you." "Furthermore," Mrs. Patterson continued, "I've learned some disturbing things about Mr. Carver's business practices, things that affect all of us who care about the integrity of our community." "What kind of things?" Caleb asked. Mrs. Henderson leaned forward. "My husband wouldn't say anything because of the loans, but I will. Carver's been systematically targeting family ranches, using that same judge to challenge legitimate claims. The Bakers, the Youngs, even the Smithfield place all forced to sell when their water rights were suddenly questioned. He wants to control the whole valley," another woman added. "Turn it into his personal empire." Mrs. Patterson fixed Clara with a direct gaze. "I was wrong about you. Mrs. Hartwell, you've shown more courage and grace than I gave you credit for. And if Carver succeeds in stealing your ranch through legal trickery, none of us are safe." "What are you proposing?" Clara asked carefully. "We're proposing to attend the hearing. All of us. Our husbands might be too cowed by business concerns to speak up, but we're not." A militant light entered Mrs. Patterson's eyes. "And I think you'll find that a courtroom full of respectable women can be quite persuasive." The morning of the hearing dawned clear and cold. Clara dressed carefully in her best dress, a burgundy wool that Ruth had finished just days before. She pinned her hair up properly, added the small cameo that had been Caleb's wedding gift, and studied herself in the mirror. She no longer saw the frightened girl from the auction platform. The woman looking back at her had confidence in her spine, purpose in her eyes. She was rounder than fashion dictated, fuller than society approved, but she was also strong and capable and loved. "Beautiful," Caleb said from the doorway. Despite the strain of recent days, his eyes warmed as they always did when he looked at her. "Are you ready for this?" she asked. "With you beside me, I'm ready for anything." The courthouse in Cheyenne was packed. Word of the hearing had spread, and it seemed half the county had turned out. Clara was amazed to see the contingent of women who'd gathered, not just Mrs. Patterson's group, but others too. Women who'd heard the story of the fire, of the attempted theft, of the young bride who'd risked her life for her husband's horses. Judge Horace Blackwood looked less pleased by the turnout. A thin man with calculating eyes, he clearly hadn't expected such scrutiny for what should have been a quiet ruling in Carver's favor. The hearing began with Carver's lawyer presenting his case technical arguments about survey lines and filing dates, all designed to muddy the clear truth of Caleb's ownership. Carver himself sat looking smugly confident, occasionally shooting triumphant glances at Caleb. Then it was their turn. Caleb's lawyer, Mr. Josiah Thornton, presented the original documents, the chain of ownership, the clear legality of the claim. But Clara could see Judge Blackwood wasn't really listening, his mind already made up. That's when Mrs. Patterson stood. "Your Honor," she said in her carrying voice, "might I address the court?" "This is highly irregular," Blackwood began. "So is burning down a man's barn to force him to sell." Mrs. Patterson continued smoothly. "So is using the law as a weapon against honest folk. So is corruption in the very halls of justice." The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Blackwood banged his gavel. "Madam, you are out of order." "No, sir, you are out of order." Mrs. Patterson stood taller. "We know about the Bakers, the Youngs, the Smithfields. We know about the pattern of harassment and false claims. And we know you've been bought and paid for." "How dare you? How dare you?" she countered. "My husband may be too frightened of Carver's financial power to speak up, but I'm not. None of us are." She gestured to the packed courtroom. "We're watching, Your Honor. The whole territory is watching. Rule against the Hartwells, and everyone will know exactly what kind of judge you are." The silence that followed was deafening. Clara could see Blackwood's face cycling through emotions, anger, fear, calculation. His eyes darted to Carver, then to the room full of witnesses, then to the door where a reporter from the Cheyenne newspaper stood scribbling notes. "The court," Blackwood said finally. His voice strained. "Finds in favor of the defendant. The Hartwell Ranch water rights are valid and uncontestable." The courtroom exploded in cheers. Clara threw her arms around Caleb, tears streaming down her face. They'd won. Despite everything, they'd won. But Carver wasn't finished. As people celebrated, he pushed through the crowd to confront them, his face twisted with rage. "You think this is over?" he snarled. "You cost me a fortune in bribes. I'll see you ruined. Both of you. You'll what?" Caleb stepped forward, shielding Clara. "Burn another barn, spread more lies. You're finished. Carver, everyone knows what you are now." Because of her, Carver's pale eyes fixed on Clara with naked hatred. "Your fat whore of a wife." He never finished the sentence. Caleb's fist connected with his jaw with all the force of weeks of suppressed rage. Carver went down hard, blood streaming from his nose. "Any man who speaks about my wife that way will answer to me," Caleb said calmly, flexing his bruised knuckles. "Any man who threatens her, who so much as looks at her wrong, will get worse than a broken nose. Are we clear?" Carver scrambled to his feet, humiliated, defeated. "This isn't over," he mumbled through the blood. "Yes," Clara said quietly, stepping beside her husband. "It is." And it was. Carver slunk out of the courtroom, out of their lives, his power broken by the united front of a community that had finally found its courage. Later, as they rode home through the afternoon light, Clara leaned against Caleb's shoulder. "We did it." "You did it," he corrected. organizing the women, changing hearts and minds. I never would have thought of that. We did it, she insisted. Together. He reined in the horses suddenly, turning to cup her face in his hands. I love you, Clara Hartwell. I love your courage and your cleverness and your kind heart. I love every inch of you, every curve, every part that others were too blind to see. Even after I caused all this trouble? Because you stood and fought when it mattered. Because you saved my life and my ranch and my soul. He kissed her deeply. There on the open road with the sun painting the sky crimson and gold. You were never hidden, Clara. You were just waiting for the right moment to shine. She thought of the auction platform, of the frightened girl who'd stood there believing she was worth less than nothing. That girl was gone now, transformed by love and trial into someone stronger. No more hiding, she agreed, and kissed him again as they headed home to rebuild what fire had taken. Stronger and better than before. Together. The victory in Cheyenne had changed everything. As word spread through the valley about how the community had stood together against Carver's corruption, something shifted in the social fabric of Frontier Bend. Clara noticed it first in small ways, nods of acknowledgement on the street, invitations to quilting bees, even a grudging smile from Mrs. Morrison at the general store. But the real transformation was in Clara herself. The woman who now walked through town with her head high bore little resemblance to the frightened girl on the auction platform just months ago. Her marriage to Caleb had given her more than a home. It had given her the courage to claim her place in the world. We're out of nails again, Tom Bradley announced one morning, studying the supplies for the barn raising. The entire community had volunteered to help rebuild what fire had taken, turning disaster into an opportunity for reconciliation. I'll go to town, Clara offered, already reaching for her shawl. I can send Samuel, Caleb said, looking up from the architectural plans spread across the kitchen table. No need. I want to check on the fabric order anyway. Ruth and I are making curtains for the new barn office. She kissed his cheek, smiling at the worry that never quite left his eyes when she ventured out alone. I'll be fine. The ride to town was pleasant in the crisp autumn air. Clara hummed to herself, comfortable now with the horses in a way she never could have imagined during those first terrifying water runs. The drought seemed like a lifetime ago, though it had been mere months. At Morrison's general store, she was surprised to find Elizabeth Patterson behind the counter, helping her father with inventory. The younger woman's face flushed when she saw Clara, and for a moment they stood frozen in mutual discomfort. Mrs. Hartwell, Elizabeth said stiffly. How can I help you? Clara could have been cold, could have savored this reversal of fortune. Instead, she found herself studying the girl, really seeing her for perhaps the first time. Elizabeth was beautiful. Yes, but there was something brittle in that beauty, a desperation in the way she held herself. I need 20 pounds of nails for the barn raising, Clara said evenly. And I'd like to check on a fabric order. Elizabeth busied herself with the order, but her hands trembled slightly. When she nearly dropped the nail container, Clara reached out instinctively to steady it, their hands touching briefly. Thank you, Elizabeth whispered, and suddenly there were tears in her eyes. Elizabeth, I'm sorry. The words burst out like water through a dam. I'm so sorry for everything I said, everything I did. I was cruel and petty and— You were afraid, Clara said quietly. Elizabeth looked up, startled. What? You were afraid of being passed over, of becoming invisible, of not mattering. Clara recognized it because she'd felt it too, just expressed differently. In a world where women's worth is measured by their ability to catch a husband, fear makes us do terrible things to each other. I wanted Caleb. Elizabeth's admission was barely audible. Not because I loved him, but because marrying him would have meant I'd won, that I was the prettiest, the most desirable, the best. She laughed bitterly. And then he chose you, and it made me question everything I'd been taught about my own value. Clara felt an unexpected wave of sympathy. Your value isn't in your face or your figure or who you marry, Elizabeth. It's in who you are, what you do, how you treat others. Easy for you to say now. You have everything. I have love, Clara corrected gently. But I earned it by being myself, not by trying to be what others expected. You could do the same. Elizabeth wiped her eyes, attempting to regain her composure. Mother says you're helping organize the harvest dance. I am. Clara made a decision. We could use more hands with the decorations, if you're interested. The surprise on Elizabeth's face was almost comical. You'd want my help after everything. I believe in second chances. God knows I needed one. Clara smiled. Besides, you have an eye for beauty. We could use that. It was a small gesture, but Clara could see its impact. Elizabeth straightened, something like hope flickering in her eyes. I'd like that. Thank you. As Clara left with her supplies, she reflected on how much had changed. The girl who'd stood on that platform would never have had the confidence to extend such grace. But then, that girl hadn't known what it was to be loved unconditionally, to have her worth affirmed daily by a man who saw her truly. When she returned to the ranch, she found organized chaos. The barn raising had begun in earnest, with what seemed like half the county wielding hammers and saws. The skeleton of the new structure was already taking shape, rising from the ashes of the old like a phoenix. Clara, Ruth called from where she supervised the food tables. Thank goodness, Mrs. Henderson brought a ham that could feed an army, but we're running low on bread. Clara dove into the familiar rhythm of feeding a crowd, but she kept finding her gaze drawn to Caleb. He worked alongside his men, no distinction between owner and hired hand. His shirt soaked with sweat despite the cool air. When he caught her looking, his face broke into a grin that made her heart skip even now. As the sun reached its peak, the workers took a break for lunch. Clara was ladling stew when she noticed a commotion near the road. A lone rider approached, slumped in the saddle, and with shock, she recognized Luke Carver. But this wasn't the arrogant man who'd threatened them. This was a broken figure, his clothes dusty and disheveled, his face gaunt. He practically fell from his horse, and it was Caleb who caught him. Please, Carver gasped. I need help. The crowd muttered, many faces showing disgust or suspicion, but Caleb helped him to a bench, calling for water. What happened? He asked. Lost everything, Carver croaked. The judge I bribed. He kept evidence, blackmailed me, took it all the ranch, the money, everything. My own men drove me off. He looked up with haunted eyes. I've got nothing left. Good riddance, someone called, and others murmured agreement. But Clara stepped forward, a cup of water in her hand. She knelt before the man who'd tried to destroy them, offering the drink. He took it with shaking hands, tears cutting tracks through the dust on his face. Why, he whispered, after what I did? Because, Clara said simply. Mercy is what separates us from men like you were, and everyone deserves a chance to choose differently. Caleb placed a hand on her shoulder, pride and love radiating from his touch. You can stay in the bunkhouse tonight, he told Carver. Tomorrow, we'll see about finding you work, honest work, but if you cause any trouble, I won't. Carver's voice broke. I swear I'm sorry for everything. The crowd dispersed slowly, some approving, others skeptical. But Clara noticed Mrs. Patterson nodding with what looked like respect, and several others seemed thoughtful rather than hostile. That evening, as the new barn stood complete in all but finishing touches, the workers transformed the space into a celebration. Someone brought out a fiddle, another a harmonica, and soon couples were dancing on the fresh-laid floor. May I? Caleb appeared at Clara's elbow, bowing formally. She curtsied, playing along. Why, Mr. Hartwell? I thought you'd never ask. He swept her into his arms, and they joined the swirling couples. Clara had learned to dance at the orphanage, one of the few graces they'd insisted on teaching, but she'd always been self-conscious about it, aware of how her body moved differently than the willowy girls. Now, in Caleb's arms, she felt only joy. He led her through the steps with easy confidence, his hand firm on her waist, his eyes never leaving hers. "You're extraordinary," he murmured. "You know that." For dancing, for offering water to a man who burned our barn, for befriending Elizabeth Patterson, for bringing this whole community together. He spun her, making her laugh, for saving my life in more ways than one. "You saved mine first," she reminded him. "That day on the platform. Best money I ever spent," he said, then pulled her closer. "Though you're priceless. Clara Hartwell, worth more than all the ranches in Wyoming." The music slowed, and other couples pressed close around them. But Clara was aware only of Caleb, his warmth, his strength, the love in his eyes that still sometimes took her breath away. "I have something to tell you," she whispered. He raised an eyebrow. "Waiting." "I'm late." When he looked confused, she clarified. "My monthly time, I'm late." His eyes widened, hands tightening on her waist. "Are you saying—" "I think so. Ruth thinks so too. She says I have the look." Clara bit her lip, suddenly nervous. "Are you happy?" For answer, he lifted her right off her feet, spinning her around while she shrieked with laughter. Around them, people cheered, not knowing the cause but celebrating anyway. "Happy." He set her down but kept her close. "Clara, you've given me everything. Love, purpose, hope. And now a child." His voice roughened. "I didn't think I could be this happy again." "Again?" she asked softly, thinking of Maggie, of the nursery that had waited empty all these years. "No, that's wrong." He cupped her face, thumbs stroking her cheeks. "Not again. This is different. New. We built this together. From that first day. Our own kind of happiness." She kissed him then, pouring all her love into it, not caring who saw. Let them see. She was Clara Hartwell, beloved wife, soon-to-be mother, valued member of this community. She had nothing to hide. Later, as the celebration wound down, she found herself standing with Ruth, watching Caleb help with the cleanup. Luke Carver worked alongside him, grateful for the chance to earn his keep honestly. "Never thought I'd see the day," Ruth commented. "Carver doing honest labor, Elizabeth Patterson helping with decorations, and Clara Jennings, excuse me, Hartwell the belle of the ball." "I was never the belle of anything," Clara protested. "Weren't you? Look around. Girl, half the women here have asked for your stew recipe. Mrs. Patterson herself said you've shown more Christian charity than anyone she knows, and every man here respects you for your courage during the fire." Ruth's eyes twinkled. "Not to mention you've got the richest rancher in 3 counties looking at you like you hung the moon." Clara followed her gaze to where Caleb was. Indeed, watching her with that soft expression she loved. "He gave me everything." "Ruth." "No." Ruth's voice was firm. "He gave you opportunity. You made yourself into who you are. Don't forget that." As the evening ended and guests departed, many stopped to thank Clara personally for the food, for the kindness to Carver, for helping bring the community together. Each thanks was a small vindication, proof that she'd found her place here. The last to leave were the Pattersons. Elizabeth hung back as her parents headed to their buggy. "Mrs. Hartwell," she said formally, then softened. "Clara, thank you for today, for the chance to help, for everything. We all deserve the opportunity to grow." Clara replied, "I'll see you next week for the dance preparations." "Yes," Elizabeth smiled, a real smile that transformed her face. "I'll be there." As their buggy rolled away, Caleb came up behind Clara, wrapping his arms around her waist, hands splaying protectively over her still flat stomach. Ready to go inside, Mrs. Hartwell. It's been a long day, and you need your rest, both of you. She leaned back against him, surveying their domain, the new barn standing proud, the ranch restored, their place in the community secured. 6 months ago, she'd been nobody, worth less than $1 in the world's eyes. Now, no more beauty hidden, she murmured. What's that? Something a wise man once told me. She turned in his arms. He was right. When you refuse to hide, when you stand in your truth, beauty isn't about what others see. It's about what you know of yourself. My brilliant wife, Caleb said, kissing her forehead. Have I told you today that I love you? Only 12 times. Not nearly enough, then. He scooped her up, making her laugh. Let's go home. Home. The words sang in Clara's heart as Caleb carried her over the threshold. This was home, not just the house or the ranch, but the life they'd built, the love they shared, the future growing within her. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. There would be the baby to prepare for, the ranch to run, relationships to navigate. But tonight, safe in Caleb's arms, Clara knew they could face anything. She'd been sold for her bold curves. Yes, but she'd bought herself a life worth living. And that was the greatest transaction of all. No beauty should be hidden, indeed, and Clara Hartwell never would be again. The afternoon sun painted the Wyoming landscape in shades of gold and amber. A gentle breeze carrying the scent of sage and wildflowers across the Hartwell ranch. Clara stood on the porch, one hand resting on her rounded belly, watching as riders approached from the east. 6 months pregnant now. She moved more slowly, but with a grace that came from being completely at peace with her body and her place in the world. That'll be the Millers, Ruth said, joining her with a glass of cool lemonade. Right on time for little Margaret's birthday celebration. Clara smiled, accepting the drink gratefully. The transformation of the ranch into a gathering place for the community still amazed her sometimes. What had once been a lonely homestead was now filled with life and laughter, especially on days like this. Mama Clara, a small voice piped up, and 4-year-old Margaret Hartwell came racing around the corner, her dark curls bouncing. The little girl they'd adopted 2 years prior, orphaned when her parents died of fever, launched herself at Clara's skirts. Careful, sweetheart. Caleb's voice came from behind as he scooped up the little girl before she could barrel into Clara. Remember, Mama's carrying your baby brother or sister. Margaret's eyes went wide with wonder, as they did every time she was reminded. Can I feel the baby kick again? Clara guided the small hand to her belly, smiling as Margaret gasped with delight at the movement beneath. The baby's saying hello to you. Hello, baby, Margaret whispered solemnly. I'm your big sister. I'll teach you everything, like how to feed chickens and brush horses and make Papa laugh when he's being too serious. Caleb chuckled, pressing a kiss to both his daughter's and wife's heads. I'm not that serious. Yes, you are, Clara and Margaret said in unison, then dissolved into giggles. As the Millers arrived, followed by the Hendersons, the Pattersons, and even Luke Carver with his new wife, a widow he'd met while working as a hired hand on a neighboring ranch, the yard filled with activity. Children ran between the adults' legs. Women set up tables groaning with food, and men gathered to admire Caleb's latest acquisition, a magnificent stallion that would improve their bloodline. Clara moved among their guests with easy confidence, ensuring everyone felt welcome. Elizabeth Patterson. Now, Elizabeth Crawford, after marrying a kind schoolteacher from Cheyenne, helped her arrange the dessert table. You're glowing, Elizabeth said, then laughed. I know everyone says that to expecting women, but you truly are. Happiness will do that, Clara replied, then winced as the baby delivered a particularly enthusiastic kick. Active one. Like a bronco in there sometimes. Clara rubbed the spot gently. Caleb's convinced it's a boy who'll be a natural horseman. I think it's a girl who'll give him a run for his money. Either way, they'll be loved. Elizabeth's voice held a wistful note. She and her husband had been trying for a child without success. Clara squeezed her hand. Your time will come, and until then, you're welcome to borrow Margaret any time. She's been asking when Aunt Lizzie will teach her to braid her hair fancy again. The party was in full swing when Clara noticed a lone figure standing at the gate. Hesitant to enter, an elderly woman, travel-worn and thin, clutching a worn carpet bag. "Excuse me," Clara murmured to Elizabeth, making her way across the yard. As she drew closer, something about the woman's eyes, green, like Caleb's, made her heart skip. "Can I help you?" Clara asked gently. The woman's gaze fixed on her face, then dropped to her pregnant belly. I'm looking for Caleb Hartwell. I'm his mother." Clara's breath caught. Caleb had mentioned his mother only once, saying she'd left when he was 12, unable to handle his father's drinking and the harsh ranch life. He'd assumed she was dead. "Mrs. Hartwell," Clara said carefully. "I'm Clara, Caleb's wife. Please, come in." "I don't know if I should. I don't know if he'll want—" The older woman's voice broke. "I heard in town about the birthday party, about how he'd built something wonderful here. I just wanted to see—" "Grandmother," Margaret had appeared at Clara's side, studying the stranger with curious eyes. "Mrs. Hartwell Sr. gasped. He has a daughter. We adopted Margaret 2 years ago," Clara explained, "and we have another on the way." Tears rolled down the weathered cheeks. "I'm a grandmother. I left my boy, and now I'm a grandmother who's never met her grandchild." Clara made a decision. Whatever had happened in the past, she knew the power of second chances. "Margaret, would you like to meet your Grandma Hartwell?" The little girl, fearless as always, stepped forward. "Are you my papa's mama? He said he didn't have one anymore." "I made mistakes," the older woman whispered. "Terrible mistakes. But yes, sweetheart, I'm your papa's mama." "Clara," Caleb's voice called. "Everything all right?" He came around the corner and froze. The color drained from his face as he stared at the woman he hadn't seen in over 20 years. "Caleb," his mother said softly. "My boy." "No." His voice was hard, cold in a way Clara had never heard. "You don't get to call me that. You left." "I know. I was weak and wrong, and you left me with him." Pain and old anger crackled in Caleb's voice. "Do you know what it was like, a 12-year-old boy trying to run a ranch while his father drank himself to death?" "Papa," Margaret's small voice cut through the tension. "Why are you sad?" Caleb looked down at his daughter, and Clara saw him struggle to master himself. "It's complicated, sweetheart." "Is it?" Margaret tilted her head. "When I'm sad, you hug me. Maybe Grandma needs a hug." The simple wisdom of a child. Clara watched Caleb's face, saw the war between old hurt and the man he'd become, a man who'd given Luke Carver a second chance, who'd built a community on forgiveness. "I have no right to ask," his mother said quietly. "But I'm dying. The doctor says I have a few months at most. I wanted to see what kind of man you became, to say I'm sorry, to meet—" Her eyes moved to Margaret and Clara's belly. "To meet my family, even if I don't deserve them." "Dying!" The words seemed to knock the wind from Caleb. Clara stepped forward, taking her husband's hand. "Perhaps we should continue this inside. Mrs. Hartwell looks tired from her journey." The party continued in the yard, but the family gathered in the parlor. Caleb, Clara, his mother, even Ruth, who'd been more mother to Caleb than anyone. The story came out in pieces, how Caleb's mother, barely 18 when she'd married, had been unprepared for the isolation and hardship of ranch life, how his father's drinking had started after a drought killed half their cattle, how she'd tried to take Caleb with her when she left, but his father had threatened violence if she tried. "I should have fought harder," she whispered. "Should have found a way, but I was scared and young and so tired." By the time I gathered courage to come back, your father had died and you'd disappeared. I've been looking for years. I changed the ranch name, Caleb said numbly. Didn't want anything of his. They talked through the afternoon painful truths. Old wounds. Tentative bridge building. Margaret, with a child's instinct, climbed into her grandmother's lap and began chattering about her chickens, breaking tension with innocent joy. Finally, Caleb looked at Clara. In his eyes, she saw the question he couldn't voice. Family is what we choose to make it, she said softly, and everyone deserves a chance to make amends. He nodded slowly, then turned to his mother. You can stay, for however long. He swallowed hard. For however long you have. Margaret should know her grandmother. The older woman broke down completely then, and after a moment's hesitation, Caleb moved to comfort her awkwardly at first, then with growing conviction. Later, as the sun set and the party wound down, Clara found herself back on the porch, watching Caleb push Margaret on the swing he'd built while his mother looked on with wonder. The sight filled her with deep satisfaction. This was what she'd helped build, not just a home, but a place where broken things could be mended. You did good today, Ruth said, joining her. Another lost soul gathered into the fold. We all need somewhere to belong, Clara replied, rubbing her belly as the baby moved. I understood that better than most. Speaking of belonging, Ruth's eyes twinkled. Elizabeth asked me to teach her my biscuit recipe, said she wanted to surprise her husband, and Mrs. Patterson's organizing a fund drive to build a proper schoolhouse, with you as the head of the committee. Me. Don't act surprised. You've become the heart of this community. Clara Hartwell, the woman who sees the best in everyone and makes them want to live up to it. As if to underscore the point, Luke Carver approached, hat in hand. Mrs. Hartwell, I wanted to thank you again for giving me that chance. My Annie and I, we're expecting now and, well, I want my child to know about kindness, about how people can change. We all can change, Mr. Carver, Clara said warmly. You proved that. After he left, Clara noticed Caleb watching her from across the yard. He excused himself from conversation and came to her, pulling her into his arms. Thank you, he murmured against her hair, for knowing what I needed before I did, for making me brave enough to forgive, for being you. He pulled back to look at her, his hands framing her face. That day at the auction, when I said no beauty should be hidden, I thought I was saving you. But you saved me. Clara, you saved all of us. We saved each other, she corrected, then gasped as the baby performed what felt like a somersault. Caleb's hands immediately went to her belly, his face lighting up as he felt the movement. Strong little one. Like their papa. Like their mama, he countered. The strongest person I know. As the stars came out, their remaining guests departed with warm farewells and promises to visit again soon. Caleb's mother, exhausted from travel and emotion, was settled in the guest room with Margaret insisting on tucking Grandma in. Finally, Caleb and Clara stood alone on their porch, looking out over the land they'd fought to keep, the community they'd helped heal, the life they'd built together. No regrets? Clara asked softly. Only one, Caleb replied. When she looked at him in alarm, he smiled. I regret I didn't find you sooner. Think of all the years we could have had. But then we might not have been ready. Clara pointed out, you needed to mourn Maggie properly. I needed to understand my own worth. We became who we needed to be to find each other. My wise wife. He kissed her temple. How did I get so lucky? It wasn't luck. Clara turned in his arms, her belly bumping against him. It was courage. Yours to bid on the woman everyone else dismissed. Mine to believe I deserved love. Both of ours to keep choosing each other through drought and fire and judgment. And we'll keep choosing, Caleb vowed, Through whatever comes, you, me, Margaret, this little one, maybe more to come. Our family. Our family. Clara agreed, the words filling her with warmth. As they headed inside, Clara paused in the doorway, looking back at the starlit land. 6 months ago, no, it was more than 2 years now, she'd stood on an auction platform believing she was worthless. Now she stood in her own home, loved beyond measure, respected by her community, carrying new life, raising a daughter, helping to heal old wounds. She'd been sold for her bold curves, yes, but what she'd gained was beyond price love that saw past surfaces. Family built on choice rather than blood. A community transformed by compassion. And the knowledge that beauty, true beauty, came from refusing to hide who you really were. "Coming to bed," Caleb called from inside. "Just a moment," Clara replied, taking one last look at the stars. Somewhere up there, she liked to think. Maggie was smiling, glad that the man she'd loved had found happiness again. And perhaps Clara's own parents were watching too, proud of the woman their daughter had become. "Thank you," she whispered to the night sky, to God, to fate, to whatever force had brought her to that auction platform and into Caleb's life. Then she went inside, to her husband and sleeping daughter and the mother-in-law, learning to be family again. To the life she'd never dared dream of, but had found the courage to claim. No beauty should be hidden, indeed. And in the Hartwell Ranch, under the vast Wyoming sky, no beauty ever would be again. Clara closed the door, her heart full, her future bright, her worth unquestionable. She was home. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to hear where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect and discuss your thoughts about Clara and Caleb's journey. If you enjoyed this tale from the Old West, please subscribe to Wild West Night. Give this video a like and hit the hype button to help more people discover these stories of courage, love, and redemption in the American frontier.